I'm glad that you're here for part 3. If you are, I encourage you, if you haven't watched part 1 and part 2, go back and watch those before you watch, part 3. Part 2, I started, talking about how women are more prone to create soul ties than men. Now, women can create godly soul ties, right? Because they, like you do create soul ties, through friendships and like through, hugging each other and cuddling and all that. So, women are more prone to create soul ties than men, right? And a soul tie can either be good or it can be bad. It can be godly or it can be bad. And so I talked about in part 2, excuse me. I talked about that in part 2. And because women are more prone to create soul ties with their friends or with their girlfriends, just to be careful, because what is the motive? Because there are, I have witnessed, women, how they do in the church, how they are, and in fact, I would even go in school. I have actually, heard women, say how they, like men, or they don't, how they're interested in men, but they would rather be with a woman. I mean, I've heard it in school. I've heard it in church, so it's all about, motive. And then, so that was part 2, because it's not that men don't create, a godly soul tie, or a best friend, with another man. And it's not that men, you don't see gay men out there. There are gay men out there, but besides that, men, because we don't like to hug, we don't like to get close, we're not necessarily as prone to create soul ties with another man. And so that's why this, in part 2, I was talking about, just be careful. Just to be careful, because you don't know what the motive is. And if there's many, bisexual women out there who, they like men, but they would rather be with a woman, or they would rather be with a man, but they still find women attractive. Yeah, you might want to be careful. And so I'm more concerned with the church, creating a whole lot of, groups for women, than I am concerned about, the church creating, now again, it is biblical, but other than it, being biblical, like I do, because I'm circling back to the dream. I remember, I can't remember if it was part 1 or part 2, I brought up, a dream that I had a while ago. It was like a year ago, or maybe over a year ago, of a dream of, this was a church, and this was a room, and one side, and like, so it was one room, but there was a wall that divided the room, but there was an opening, a passway, where you can go from one side to the room to the other. And on one side, there were some males, but not, like maybe one or two males, but the other, like the majority was female on one side, and on the other, the majority were men, right? And there was a TV screen, and on the TV screen there was, like, I don't know what they had on, but on this side of the one where there was mostly females, they were having sexual, like, they were having sex. I'm just gonna flat out say it. They were having, lesbian, women on women, sex. In the place where there was, because there was a wall that divided the room, and then there was, a pathway. In the pathway, there were church leaders that sat against the wall of the pathway. And there were leaders that knew that there were, like lesbian type things going on, on one side of the room, but they paid no attention to it. They didn't really pay any attention to it. They were so focused, like, on the side that had men, and they were wanting the men, because on both sides there was this television that, like a message, and they were focused on the men. They wanted the men to behave, and they wanted the men to watch this this teaching or whatever it was that was playing. They didn't really care that there was lesbian things going on the other side. They were more focused on the side that had, men, and they were like there to watch those men and pay attention to those men. However, on the far side of the room, there were a few females on the far side of that room that were doing sexual things. They were doing, like on the far side, like 2 or 3 women and like 1 male or maybe 2 male were, like, I can't exactly remember, but they were doing sexual things. Well, they didn't really, the leaders didn't recognize that they were doing those things. Like in the dream, it's like these leaders were completely blind. They weren't blind to one side, but they were blind to see that on the other side there were some that were actually doing sexual things. Not many, because many people, well, most of them were men, and many of the men were afraid to anyways, because they were being watched like hawks. But even though the church leaders knew that the other side were doing homosexual things, lesbian things, they did not care. And so, what does that tell you? I mean, that tells you that it seems like the church wants to protect the women, wants to protect females, but they have it all wrong. They should be protecting the church from homosexuality. And they're not.